Trebje se demonstrira.
Agresija je završena.
Nemojte da mislite da nećete odvesti Bosnu i Hercegovinu.
Neće više niko možda ostaviti.
Republika Hrvatska proglašuje samostalnom i suverenom državom.
Türkiye'den daha büyüktür. Ufkumuzu 782 bin kilometre kareyle sınırlandıramayız.
Hello everyone, this is Balkan Chronicles, Jakub Horvat speaking, your usual host, and I am very happy to have you again, all our listeners, in our English series where we discuss everything related to Balkans with expert. And I indeed have an expert with me today. It's Strahinja Obrenović, Serbian-based expert on energy, but as usual, I am not the expert on our experts. Strahinja, take it away. Who are you? Where do you come from? And what will we discuss today regarding the Balkans?
Hi, Jakub, and all our dear listeners. Thank you very much for this kind invitation. My name is, as you mentioned, is Strahinja Obrenović, and I am assistant professor at the Faculty of Political Science, here based in Belgrade, Serbia, at the University of Belgrade, and I'm specialized mostly in the field of energy law and policy, specifically when we are talking about the Europe and also the region of the Western Balkans. So I'm covering different topics ranging from the energy security, internal energy market, energy solidarity, energy cooperation in the region, so basically everything that is relevant to our energy systems, and of course something that is in front of us, that is the energy transition with all of its challenges and opportunities as well.
Yes, thank you for the introduction of yourself, and also you touched on what we want to discuss today. It's energy transition in the Balkans. It's not only the matter of the Balkans. We are living in very turbulent times. The region of whole Europe, of Central Europe and Balkans, after all, it's all interconnected and further even connected with affairs and infrastructures and agreement outside of our region. So we are mostly dependent on what's going on, and so we not necessarily have the means to influence it. We can just adapt. Please, can you do some introduction to, let's say, the energy framework or situation in the Balkans?
Yeah, the general overview, as you mentioned, that we are interconnected, interdependent, and all of these events that are currently going on the Middle East, previously with the war in Ukraine, and of course a lot of previous events that influence our economies, they influenced the energy market as well. So when we are talking about the region of the Western Balkans, we are sharing the same goal of becoming the climate neutral as other part of the European continent, and that is the obligation that was undertaken by the European Union, first with the European Green Deal launch, and our countries from the Western Balkans actually pledged to the same goal a year after in Bulgaria capital, in Sofia, with the Sofia Declaration. Actually, we also accepted that idea to work on the energy transition. When we are talking about the geopolitical situation and political, which is influencing as well the energy sector, we are talking about the region that is still in the negotiation process. So we have that obligation actually to adopt the EU rules, that is the process of harmonization. And in that sense, we are also adopting the rules regarding the energy markets, including the electricity, gas markets, but as well as environmental rules that were previously adopted at the EU level. Of course, we are at the same time members of one community, which is called Energy Community. What is the idea behind this organizational regional? Actually, it was established like 20 years ago, and it gathered all of the countries from the Southeast Europe initially, with the aim to extend the energy market inside the EU to include the rest part of Europe, and that is actually the part of Western Balkans. In the meantime, we have Bulgaria and Romania that joined the EU, and Croatia in 2013. So the relevance for them of this organization is not that important nowadays as it is for the rest part of the Balkans. Balkans, and we are talking about the Western Balkans 6. And of course, afterwards, we have the adoption of the accession treaty or the protocol to be a member of this organization by Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova. So there is this kind of extension of those internal energy market rules to those countries.
I want to ask, you mentioned the electricity market. Well, European Union has one market for electricity, so countries produce electricity and they buy it for the current prices. How about the Balkans? Is there one common market for electricity, or are there various markets, or how does it work?
Yeah, since the 90s, we have this idea behind the whole integration package regarding the internal energy market, including the electricity sector, basically to have the internal market without barriers, without borders affecting the flows of the electricity and other types of our energy sources. And that the idea is to implement the same idea in the Western Balkans. But of course, there are a lot of obstacles when it comes to those interconnection projects. We are now discussing, for example, nowadays the further integration of the electricity markets in the region in order to get the exemption from the, for example, CBAM, which is Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. Actually, one instrument of the EU in order to bring even the producers and other energy-intensive companies outside the EU border to pay for their pollution if they don't have their established ETS system or carbon taxes, which are similar to those existing inside the EU, in order to bring, of course, the fair competition. That is the main idea. And the problem with the region is that most of the countries still recently didn't have such mechanism comparable to that one existing inside the EU. And first, if I'm not mistaken, the Montenegro adopted something that can be perceived as ETS system or carbon pricing mechanism. And since this year, we also have in Serbia, because from this year, we also have CBAM fully effective in the practice regarding the exports of the electricity and other energy-intensive products to the EU market. So it's very influencing our energy system, our economy, our business that is exporting their products to the EU market, that is closely connected to this market, which is oriented actually exporting to that one.
You mentioned on Serbia and exporting energies. How is Serbia regarding its independence on electricity generation? Is it wholly independent?
It depends, because in our energy structure or the energy mix, when it comes to the electricity generation, mostly we are relying on our power plants that are fired on coal. So we are using this type of coal that is not of good quality.
Lignite, I believe.
Exactly, as most of other countries in the region. The other source is hydropower, and I think that we have potential to further develop this kind of energy, which is in line with the renewables objectives, with the climate objectives. So there is opportunity to further develop it. And when the weather is good, when the conditions are going very well in Serbia, we have a surplus in electricity generation from this kind of hydropower plants, big hydropower plants. And in that period of year, we are exporting the electricity. But unfortunately, that is not the case throughout the year. It's not constant. So sometimes we need to import the electricity from other countries. And with the CBAM in place, unfortunately, we are losing the position of exporter of electricity to the EU market. So if we are not prepared to move rapidly toward cleaner solution, then we are seeking to other markets to export our electricity.
Yes, I heard in a different situation that after all, electricity market, it's a commercial market, it's a commodity which is sold and the producers have to be profitable, and CBAM basically, it can get so high that it's no longer feasible to be producer of electricity for commercial purposes if it's applied. So that is the case in Serbia.
Exactly, yeah. So when we are talking about the electricity, it is still a commodity. It is not recognized as a strategic commodity that needs to be regulated separately. And we are talking about the commercial logic behind the electricity and energy trading. Of course, we have this process of the energy transition, which is quite challenging, not just for our countries, but for Europe and the rest of the world. That is the case, especially with this technological state of art or the current technological development that is still not in that position to offer us some alternatives. I'm specifically thinking about the storing of the electricity, which is still not that efficient to provide you opportunity to rely just, for example, on wind and solar. So you need baseload energy, and that includes, unfortunately, still the fossil fuel industry. And we will see whether we'll be in position to fully replace by 2050, or although that goal was set earlier, we need to see the pace of technological process and the cost of this transition process.
One of the bit of issues which has affected us all since 2014 and even before is the gas supply of natural gas, which is used for both heating and electricity generation. It's one of the, I would say, cleaner sources of energy, particularly compared to lignite-fueled power plants. How is the situation for example, in the Balkans in general? I know in Bosnia and Herzegovina, it's very often portrayed as being 100% dependent on Russian supplied natural gas, but the natural gas makes up only 3% electricity generation for the entire country. The rest is coal and hydropower and solar. How is the rest of the country? Serbia is also supposed to be, I guess, is dependent on Russian supplied gas, but to what amount?
When it comes to the natural gas as an energy source, it is important for the Western Balkans, but we should bear in mind that we are not big consumers. So maybe it is more challenging and a bigger problem in other countries, including some of the EU member states, which are bigger consumers, which need more quantities of natural gas to be imported, because we are witnessing the decline of the production of natural gas in Europe, with the exemption of certain EU member states. The overall situation here in the Balkans is that we still import, specifically in Serbia, and as you mentioned in Bosnia and Herzegovina, large chunk of natural gas quantities from Russia. We did a bit of diversification in Serbia thanks to the interconnection with Bulgaria, which is providing us the opportunity to import from other sources of natural gas as well, for example, from Azerbaijan. Then there are other projects announced, and we will see whether they will materialize in the future. That is the interconnection, and Serbia is once again leading in that sense. The interconnection with Romania, which is becoming one of the most important producers of natural gas in Europe. Then another interconnection is announced with North Macedonia, which is actually to be extended further to the Greece market, because North Macedonia is doing a separate project with Greece in order to reach the terminals in Greece, primarily for liquefied natural gas or LNG. And LNG is bringing more flexibility to the gas market, because you can choose different suppliers. You are not bound by one supplier with the fixed infrastructure, such as gas pipelines. So yeah, we have those dynamics that are similar to the Europe, to the other parts of the world that are move forward toward those LNG supplies instead of traditional pipeline gas supplies. There is another project that is going in Bosnia and Herzegovina. It is still disputable whether this project will materialize as well, and that is a project supported by the United States, and it is called Southern Interconnection.
And we have a whole episode on that, dear listeners. Please find it in our podcast. About 7 months ago, we have covered that project in its infancy. It has moved forward a bit since last year, so go ahead and listen to that. I will put a link in the description below.
Yeah, just to sum up with that project, and this project is particularly interesting from the point of the EU approach and the US approach, mainly whether this tendering procedure is in line with the EU rules regarding the competition, or there is special treatment to one company or one investor which is interested to build this infrastructure. And it is actually reflecting the complex nature of geopolitics today and different kind of interests that are present between the states, and of course that is reflecting to the energy sector as well.
Yes, it absolutely has to do thing with politics, because these infrastructure projects, they are major. Even if we talk, well, in scale, a pretty small project in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which will mostly is focused on the internal market. Bosnia is not looking forward to be a big transmitter of gas via its territory to its neighbors, and it's going to run into maybe 10 years and cost maybe billion euro worth of investment, and of course are involved with politics as in any other major enterprise. Politics play an important role in any major infrastructure project. We mentioned Bosnia and Herzegovina. That is just one example. Then we had Serbia. Well, I keep coming back to Serbia, but we are recording this in Serbia, so I cannot avoid it. There was issue, or can call it an issue, regarding NIS oil industry, and that last year it was sanctioned repeatedly, but then exempted from sanctions, and it forced Russia to sell its share in NIS, and there were a couple of interested parties, Hungarian MOL, Gulf conglomerates, or maybe even Serbian government itself. What is the situation nowadays? Well, we are already in June 2026. How has it developed since last year?
Yeah, politics is present, and we cannot underestimate its importance even when we are talking about those kind of projects and commercial relations. It is obvious from the gas sector. We have this attitude from the EU that the Russian gas is not preferable option since 2022, although previously the EU relied heavily on Russian gas and other types of energy. And of course, the region was part of some projects which brought the energy from Russia. For example, the Turk Stream, which is crossing the territory of Turkey, is extending further into Bulgaria and Serbia and Hungary, and that is the only route which is at the moment active and is operating when it comes to the Russian gas pipeline exports. All other routes stopped in the meantime. We had some LNG exports to the other European countries, but this year the EU adopted this regulation banning the imports of Russian gas, and date is targeted or set to be in 2027, if I'm not mistaken, September or October in the autumn of 2027. That is also the case in the oil industry as well. So you mentioned the case of Serbian national oil company, where Russians held or still have the largest part of the shares inside the company. It's around 56% of all shares inside the NIS. We have the sanction regime adopted by the American administration, although we have different sanctions adopted as well from the Brussels, targeting the Russian energy sector. And our company is currently in the process of operating under those licenses with the exemption which were adopted by the OFAC. The current negotiations are going on beside the Hungarian part, or MOL, and the Russian side, which is Gazprom Neft. We are not sure at the moment how this situation will evolve, and whether Russian will going to sell their stakes in the NIS. I think there is interest of Russian energy companies to still keep their position on the international energy market, but it will depend, of course, of the US position, then the alignment of that position with EU sanction regime, and of course a lot of is depending on the situation and war in Ukraine, because we have some positive signals from the Middle East crisis that we are approaching to some kind of solution, but still the contemporary geopolitics landscape is fragile, and we should be aware of all of this and the limitation of some diplomatic solution, which are unfortunately influencing the energy sector as well.
Yes, I don't want to be an energy trader nowadays, or even energy analytician trying to predict some development of prices in some time horizon. It's really, you cannot see into the particular minds of people in power who can one day decide just to shut down the biggest production of either gas or oil for half a year or for 4 years. Yes, this is the time we live in, and the governments have to adapt into this situation, and us citizens have to suffer the ever-increasing prices of heating, of electricity, and of course gasoline.
Exactly, and the structure of the contemporary energy system changed a lot comparing to 2 or 3 decades ago, when the state was the sole or the most dominant actor which is providing the security of supply, energy security. Then we went through the process of liberalization of the energy sector, so we have more diverse actors. Of course, consumers are not that passive on nowadays market. They are as well prosumers. They are engaging with other peers and other citizens to the energy communities, renewable communities, so they are actually producing energy, not just consuming. So this changed a lot, and of course all of those kind of political events, we can make some parallels to the 70s and oil crisis during that time. We still rely on oil, and we are witnessing that through the higher prices. I wouldn't agree with all that you said regarding the energy traders, because some of them are really happy nowadays and they are actually benefiting from this kind of situation.
Maybe those who share some insider information.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Insiders, and those that are more experienced, and they know what is the perfect time to sell and what is the perfect time to buy, and actually on that difference to make profits. Those profits in the energy industry, although it's not good for consumers, and a large part of society and population still brings benefits to a limited amount of people.
Well, I want to come back a bit to the overview of the Balkans regarding the upcoming transformation. We mentioned something about Serbia, we discussed Bosnia. I know that on the forefront of the run towards carbon neutral energy is Albania, because of its large portion of functional dams, hydroelectricity. I can mention Kosovo. Kosovo is the biggest pollutant in Europe. It operates 2 coal-fueled power plants. One was built in the 60s, one was built in the 80s. The one in the 60s was supposed to be refurbished, but nothing came of it, so it's a huge pollutant. And the modernized one, not as much, but Kosovo was supposed to reach some interim goals and to start producing more of its share of energy via solar. And this came to naught in these couple of years because of the political crisis. Some projects and policies could not be enacted, as Kosovo has not had a stable government in almost 2 years now. How is, for example, North Macedonia, and what would be your recommendation as an expert on energy transition to the countries of Western Balkans until the 2050 deadline?
Yeah, I'm afraid that there is no easy way to achieve those targets, and there is no straight line toward the objective of 2050 of becoming carbon neutral. You mentioned, and that is correct, that most of the region still relies on the coal, and that is the situation in Serbia. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, we also have coal plants in North Macedonia, other countries in the region as well. Albania is exception, which is 99%, I think, rely on the hydropower, but it is not always beneficial, and you are still dependent on the weather conditions. So if you have good water flows and water level in your rivers, then you can produce enough electricity which will meet your internal demand. But in a case of dry weather conditions and with all of those consequences of climate change that we are witnessing in recent years, that is also influencing your output from those kind of hydro plants. So it is not good to rely just on one energy source, and the Albania example is providing us all inputs on this kind of situation as well. But yeah, the main obstacle is how to make a transition from those regions, especially from the perspective of the local population and the workers still working in coal mines and coal power plants, and that are very important for those local communities around that places. So we need the energy transition solution which is just, which is inclusive. We should bear in mind the cost of transition and the impact of those local communities and population and their families that are relying on the workers in those facilities. So it's not that straightforward. There is no straightforward answer on that challenge, but that is the issue number one. The other aspect of this problem is, of course, what will come instead of coal power plants. So we have some positive steps that we're undertaking in the region. For example, in Serbia, we have 2 rounds of the auction, but unfortunately we have some delays announced starting this year that there will be no 3rd round of auctions. Other countries are also performing well when it comes to the deployment of renewables. North Macedonia set ambitious target to use the solar energy, but still I think that there is a room to improve your performance in terms of the scale and the speed of those processes. Of course, we have the influence of external actors, so they are still interested from the perspective of fossil industry to export more to this region, and it is questionable whether this is in line with our targets. So although we can have, for example, natural gas as a bridge solution, is it completely in line with the transitioning toward some sustainable fuels, or how to deploy the existing infrastructure that was used in the fossil industry and is currently used in the fossil industry to repurpose or refurbish this kind of infrastructure to serve the climate targets? Is it technically possible and feasible? The other point of view is, of course, funding, and we are closely related, as we already mentioned, to the EU market and how to utilize better the funds available in this part or this policy segment. And I think that there is a place to perform better in this segment.
Slovakia, the Czech Republic, Hungary, and a couple of others, France and Great Britain, are always saying that, look, we are quite happy where we are. We have a very strong base power source, and that is nuclear energy, which in the case of Slovakia provides more than half of the baseline power, similar in Hungary. And out of the Balkans, well, Slovenia is running a nuclear reactor, Romania is. I know that Greece is refusing to go down that way. Serbia has repelled its law on banning nuclear energy in 2024. Is this something Western Balkan countries can explore? Now there is a sort of nuclear boom ongoing.
Yeah, it's quite a new question in the region, and I think that Serbia is leading this kind of discourse regarding the possibility to use the nuclear energy as a solution. So yeah, we have this division inside the EU, so you can see kind of 2 groups of EU member states, one that are opposing this kind of energy or energy source, and the other group is favoring, and they are aiming to further develop nuclear capacities and to build new reactors. And it is not easy to give one answer on this question. So yes, we had kind of taboo inside Serbia, for example, example, and most of the ex-Yugoslav republics, with the exception, of course, of Slovenia, which was the only republic that actually completed successfully the nuclear power plant together with Croatia, so they are sharing this nuclear power plant. And after the Chernobyl disaster in 1987, we have a moratorium imposed in that time in Yugoslavia to further develop and construct nuclear power plants. So it was only in 2024 that we abandoned that position and we made a change in law in order to enable actually the construction and further development of the nuclear energy. And since that time we are cooperating with those countries that have experience with the nuclear energy, with the operating the nuclear power plants. And on the first place we have France, and we signed with them actually the deal to do preliminary studies regarding the possibility to develop the nuclear power plant and develop nuclear energy on the Serbian soil. So we will see the outcome of that process, although we have some reports that are favoring that it is feasible. The problem is to bring resources which this type of energy requires. So the region is facing with a lot of economic and financial challenges, and it will be a huge task for them to develop this kind of energy. But if it is the only solution and if we don't have technological breakthrough in the energy field, I think it can be an option to replace those coal power plants that are dominating our energy markets. Also, there is interest for the small modular reactors, but we are talking about the mostly experimental technology, and that is of course something that is present and common even inside the European market and other countries that want to develop this kind of energy. We will see the outcome of the whole process, and of course we need to work on our further measures regarding the regulatory and legal framework in order to enable, from that perspective, deployment and development of nuclear power plants. We need people specialized and workers, and that is not an easy task given that we don't have that people at the moment, and other countries are facing the deficit, those kind of specialists. That is obvious even within those countries that have some experience with the nuclear energy. And there are good examples of countries that are still debating inside the society, and we had previously referendums where people are giving their opinions regarding that kind of energy. So it will need all representatives of the society, of the governments, of the industry, and in order to make some decision that is smart, that is previously well informed, and should bring, different perspectives before making a final decision.
Yes, I read analyses that it's very hard to build a commercially feasible nuclear power plant because they are very expensive. There is a lot of regulation because of safety, and it could take even 20 years for a nuclear power plant to be profitable. So these are really long-term investment by governments and not by companies or conglomerates looking for investment in countries. It has to be, as you said, really a decision of the whole society to go this way. And some of the world's first nuclear power plants are still running since 1960s, and their lifespan has been extended to 80 years, some in the US even to 100 years. So yes, these power plants are here for longer than the people who grew up with them. So yes, it's something to consider, definitely. Thank you very much for coming on air. I think we have covered this topic quite extensively and exhaustively, but it's a great and very current topic which we are all debating. My personal opinion is that we need some locally sourced energy, as much of it as possible, because being dependent on others has proven in the last 2 decades to be very difficult. And if you cannot turn the electricity or run your car to work, it's very hard to get by. So thank you again for coming on air. I definitely want to have you on for the next session. And to all of our audience, please stay tuned, and you can find the links to some of the episodes we have debated here in the description below.
Bye bye, it was a pleasure.